Well, as you know, there is an enormous trial underway in Ottawa. Tamara Leach, the spiritual leader of the Ottawa trucker convoy, enters her second year in prosecution. She was jailed for 49 days before being released. And the trial is a bizarre, excruciating exercise. It's so clear to me that the process is the punishment. I think the Crown realizes they don't really have a case against her. They'll just use the trial itself as a kind of punishment. As you know as well, there are trials underway in Lethbridge, Alberta, trials for the so-called Coots 3 and the Coots 4, who are down to 2, actually. Coots, of course, being the name of the town, the little village, actually, at the border between Alberta and Sweetgrass, Montana, where there was another blockade. Those are serious trials, and they continue in the weeks ahead. But there was a third location where the truckers had a sensational blockade that made international news. You may recall that the city of Windsor, across the bridge from the American city of Detroit, was blocked as well. And this got great attention in Toronto because that bridge is an important international hub for the auto industry. Well, many charges were laid over that. And I'm delighted to report to you news from our cousins at the Democracy Fund. Let me read to you from a press release. The Crown Attorney has withdrawn all criminal charges against William Laframboise, the alleged leader of the Windsor protests that blocked the Ambassador Bridge in February of 2022. The Democracy Fund litigation director, Alan Honner, stood beside his client, Laframboise, as the charges were withdrawn before Justice Campbell this past Wednesday. And here's my favorite part. While the Crown Attorney stated that there were tribal issues, he also explained to the court that it was not in the public interest to prosecute Laframboise, given the evidentiary challenges of the Crown's case and other serious matters that were vying for trial time in a backlogged court system. In other words, there was no point in trying the case. There was really no public interest, and there was, that little thing called evidence. Well, what a delight to have the acquittal of Mr. Laframboise. And I understand that the Democracy Fund, in fact, represented a third of all the people in that blockade. Joining us now in person is Alan Honner, the litigation director, of the Democracy Fund. Alan, great to see you.
Thanks very much for having me on, Ezra.
Well, I think it's pitiful that they went all the way to the end before saying, just kidding, we don't have enough evidence to try it. They didn't have any less evidence today than they had 2 years ago or 2 months ago. They just, I think, were in a staring contest with you and Mr. Laframboise, trying to get you guys to buckle.
Well, Ezra, it's not uncommon for criminal charges to resolve right before the trial or close to the trial. This particular trial was set for 5 days, and it was going to be heard at the end of April. TDF came on just about 2-3 weeks ago, and within about a week of our getting on to represent Mr. Laframboise, the charges were withdrawn.
I didn't know that. So for the first 2 years, he actually didn't have. Did he have another lawyer?
No, he didn't have counsel. He was self-represented, but he was sort of a unique person. He wasn't like the other protesters. All of the other protesters that we represented, they were all arrested on the streets at the scene of the protest. But Laframboise was different. He was arrested about 6 months later. And he was arrested because, I suppose it's the police, maybe it was the Attorney General, decided that they needed a leader. They needed somebody who could probably be a bit of a scapegoat for the blockades that happened in Windsor. And like I say, it's not that uncommon for charges to resolve prior to trial. So that's when everybody's focused on them. But in this case, Mr. Laframboise lost his opportunity to defend himself in trial. And, a withdrawal is a favorable conviction, but it doesn't have that same satisfaction of going before a court and being acquitted.
So they waited half a year to charge him. That's weird in itself. He was self-represented, which is always risky. Then the Democracy Fund comes in and the Crown says, oh, yikes, maybe this isn't going to go how we thought it was. But it's sort of funny that the Crown prosecutor is saying, well, it's not in the public interest. There's all this backlog. He knew that all along. There's been a backlog since the pandemic. Courts aren't just jammed because of all these foolish pandemic lockdown tickets. They're jammed because the courts basically went on a one-year holiday. That is not new news. We knew that in 2021, 2022, 2023. And it's only been used as the excuse now. I think that the presence of Democracy Fund lawyers was probably the thing that tipped the balance. They thought this is not going to be a cakewalk.
Well, Ezra, all lawyers would like to think that. When I got on the file, the charges were withdrawn. And,
it's a chronological fact.
Maybe there's some truth to that. But I think, I don't think the facts were there to convict Laframboise. The facts weren't there to convict a lot of these people who were arrested in connection to these protests. Now, one of the interesting things that happened when I was in court with Mr. Laframboise is that the Crown Attorney came in with a prepared statement. It was about 2 pages long. And I knew he was going to come in with a statement because he had to say something to the judge. He had to explain to the judge why he was withdrawing these charges quite close to the trial date. Judges don't always like that because we have this backlog court system. And if you resolve something too close to trial, the judge will ask, well, why didn't you do it sooner? I could find somebody else.
Yeah, because they've got this judge now, a week of his life is freed up, and he's not going to take a vacation, but how can he fill that with real work? It's on short notice. So it's a discombobulation to him. It's a discombobulation to the entire legal system.
That's right. And as you say, there's a backlog in the court system. That existed before COVID, but COVID made it so much worse, right? And so the Crown Attorney comes in and he makes these comments, which I think are very fair. He admits that the evidence isn't as strong against Mr. Laframboise as the Crown would like it to be. So there are real triable issues here. He also mentions the backlog in the court. And one of the things that's happening in the Ontario Court of Justice right now is that the courts are stacking trials.
What's that mean?
Because it means that if you go to court for your trial date, there are going to be other people who are scheduled to have their trials in that same courtroom on that same date. And they're doing this to make sure they're trying to...
Like double booking, like double overselling an airline by 5 seats. So what happens if you show up, your lawyers show up, and they say, sorry, we're out of time?
Well, that can happen, right? So you might... It's not just a question of being double booked. It can be triple booked, quadruple booked. And the more serious cases are going to be tried before the less serious cases, right? Because we have this backlog and there's some pushback about cases, serious cases, sexual assault cases, being stayed because the Crown can't get to them.